It's just
Okay.
great. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the true GS4 herbal ley sort of section. I've got two fields. That the one was that steep hill that we started on. I did the Berseem clover, forage rape, and chicory. I had 2 years of the chicory, the forage rape, and Berseem clover disappear after a year. So it became a kind of chicory and grass mix. It was never meant to be in for 2 years, but it stayed in because the chicory was so good, just kept coming. So there's no point getting rid of it. I'll keep grazing that out. But I wanted to establish a long-term ley there. And my route into establishing a decent long-term, and the field next to it was very poor. I'd had some issues with it. I tried to 1 year, I sprayed it off and direct drilled not right. What was it? Kale. Sorry, apologies. Yeah, I wanted a winter crop of kale because I successfully managed to do that in Devon, where you keep the sward for them to trample on, and just direct drilled it in, but it absolutely failed miserably. So then the following year, what came back from the sward after it had that light dose of glyphosate was a whole load of sort of soft brome, and it was terrible. So I called it my field of doom. I didn't enjoy farming it, and I didn't enjoy grazing it, and I topped it a lot, and I had to do something with it to get it back into better condition. I topped it and tried to put in a winter forage mix to give it was like a grazable cover crop to give it some structure and soil depth and rooting depth over winter. That didn't really do anything either. That failed. So it was, as I put the countryside stewardship mid-tier scheme together, I decided that field and the hill next to it would go into a GS4 herbal leys. Now, this is a Cotswold Seeds GS4, and my concern is because I wanted to establish this herbal ley now using the mid-tier funding, have the funding for it over 5 years, but then be left with what I wanted. And I wanted to be left with a ley or a permanent pasture of deeper rooting grasses. And I didn't like the look of Festilodium, ryegrass, and lots of ryegrass. Basically 25%, 30% of modern, effectively nitrogen dominant grasses, or that would require managing in a different way. So I changed the mix. I took those out, reduced the ryegrass dramatically, increased cocksfoot, and this is our actual mix. There we go. So I reduced the ryegrass to 7.5%, increased the cocksfoot, added meadow foxtail because it's a really early growth mixture. Added timothy, added tall fescue, meadow fescue, tuning fescue, meadow grasses. So that had what I would hope is a deep rooting, more permanent pasture. Then had obviously the same clovers. I reduced the lucerne, and I removed sainfoin because it wasn't suited. Added a knapweed, and it's quite an expensive mix. The foxtail is really expensive. But I wanted to have it in because it provides early bite. I can send that. I'm happy to send that mix to anybody who wants to have a look at it. It's nothing I'm worried about there. Yeah, it's an expensive mix, but it was being paid for under stewardship, so I was prepared to pay that bit more. A slight, don't worry, you don't have to read this. This is Newman Turner's Fertility Pastures. It's just worth mentioning. He does a section about mixtures in herbal leys because he's all about the herbal ley. And what he did, he said there are so many tests on different grasses and different herbs and how they grow and how they make the mixtures, but he was convinced that the mixtures were all put together on the basis of what was best for the seed merchant. So he wanted to test what was actually best for the cow. So he wanted to consult the cow. So he planted 35 individual single species blocks of all the different things you find in herbal leys. and then gave them free access along a fence line, so they when they moved into the field, they could choose the one that they wanted to have. And when they were given a choice of 35, they went straight for sheep's parsley, plantain, and chicory, and they pretty much ignored the ryegrasses, meadowgrasses, fescues, etc. After that, they then chose burnet, kidney vetch, sandfoin, and alsike. So it's interesting that he then built his herbal ley mixtures, which are a kind of what are used by Cotswold Seeds and people like that, as a basis based on these findings, and not on the basis of well, I think it's just more important to consult what the cow actually, they're the ones eating it after all. So heavy on the herbs. So in May 21, we received a whole load of expensive bags of seed, which looked lovely. That's the same mix. Plough the fields again, hang my head in shame. But it's such an expensive and a long process. I wanted to make sure we established it correctly and properly. One of our local contractors had this set of rolls, which just broadcasts the seed down in front of it, just blows the seed down in front and rolls it straight in, which was brilliant, really cheap. Rolled it in, he broadcast it in, then rolled it again. So I've got 2 passes with these heavy rolls, and it's a very cheap application system. First graze for that field was 28th of July. So it went in on the 1st of May, and 28th of July, this is the sheep going into it. It's much improved since then, because I've now, as part of the mid-tier, that fence is now a hedge line. There's a fence on the left that runs along the bottom of it, is also a proper fence line. We put in hedges, which were mulched with sheep's wool, which have been very successful. Different story. But yeah, it's much easier to manage now because I've got proper fences around the 2 herbal ley fields. So that's lambs going into a field in the first summer. I mentioned it was I went into the countryside stewardship, and that pays, and I know we'll talk about this later on. That was paying £382 a hectare, which really made sense. It covered the cost pretty much of the establishment in the first year, and then it's provided a really good payment every year. And I don't find the terms and conditions onerous, because I know under organic standards you've got to leave it for even longer. How long do we leave it? 5 weeks. 5 weeks between the 1st of May and 31st of July. I don't find that onerous at all, because I'm invariably leaving my fields for 70 to 80 days in between grazing anyway. I could probably even handle the organic standards. It wouldn't be a concern. I like to get big growth in between grazings, especially now I've moved to cattle. I did it with the sheep as well, but the cattle can definitely handle it better. It was an extremely good crop in the first year. I think it established very well using using plough, power harrow, and then the seed and roll. I don't think you can fault that as a crop. We had quite a bit of fat hen again. We had quite a bit of thistles. So after this first graze, I did go through and topped it quite high. So I didn't really top the crop. I topped the thistles and I topped the fat hen just to tidy them up. And the thistles haven't actually really come back and presented much of a problem. I'm hoping the deeper rooting, opening up of the soil, they are surplus to requirements. But it is a great crop. Yeah, Fertility Pastures. Very good book, that. The other one, the Clifton Park Farming System, is very good as well, Robert Elliott. Lambs did extremely well on this, fattened well, and I genuinely think the flavour of the lamb has been even more improved. We sell our lamb direct, we were doing box lamb direct, and every year it's got better. I think it's got better because the soil's getting better, and I think it's got better because they were finishing on Herbal Leys, and I think it improves the flavour. And I have absolutely no problem putting weight on with sheep on this kind of mixture. You know, there are what, seven different grasses, 6 different legumes, a bunch of herbs. Yeah, there's a lot in there. Worm count's gone down a lot because I've sold the sheep, but the worm count was, I think it definitely had a beneficial. It was beneficial for worm counts grazing on this. I've managed to manage better through the last couple of years, but the issue I had with worms was not so much counts, was resistance, because I'd already inherited double resistance at the farm, and then I moved into triple resistance, and that's just only one solution to that: sell your sheep. So I didn't want to be reaching for Zolvix on a regular basis, let alone start tech. So I had some resistance to white and yellows, and I was getting resistance to I had resistance to Sidectin, which is annoying. So I didn't like worming. I did a lot of FET counts. I was involved in the Flynn breeders program, did saliva IgA program. We did all the research on saliva IgA, serum IgA. We were testing FET testing all our ewe lambs, testing all our rams. We did a lot of breeding, part of a breeding program. So even that, just like, excuse my French, it's like pissing into the wind. It was just really impossible to get on top of. So I decided the best thing to do was to actually remove sheep from the system for a few years. So that's lambs getting fat, liking their field. This goes to show this, just to show you how crazy that stuff can get. This is a fat hen right up above the. There's chicory in there as well, but there's a lot of fat hen in the first year with soil disturbance like that. I put the ewes onto the steep hill rather than, and the lambs are on the bottom hill, and this is the ewes in with the fat hen, and they stripped it. There you go. That's the next day. So they went into that and they came out of that. Great trampling, loads of grass in that mix, lots of grass on flat on the floor, good trampling, not a single leaf to be seen on a fat hen plant. And they eat all the seed heads as well, almost preferential over the other stuff. I tried it myself. It's tastier than the chicory, but it's a little bit salty. I suspect that's probably why they like it. It's quite nice. But that I love that volume of trampling, and I think it's really important to let these pastures have an opportunity to set seed and get really tall and get high, get full depth, give them their full rooting depth, let them set seed, keep yourself free reseed. Such an expensive seed. If you can get the thing to seed itself at least once in your grazing year, then that's beneficial going forward, and you extend the chicory and extend everything else in there beyond the sort of 3 or 4 years that you might, well, 5 years they say, but now I'd like to see the dates on these, because this is the regrowth in the bottom of that field when they still haven't even left the field. So they went all the way along the bottom of the field up to the top, and then under the strip along the top, underneath the hedge. And I've been in there and topped this field to clean out the thistles, and that's the regrowth before they've even left the field. It's only a 5-acre field, and there's a fair chunk of lambs there. Coming back into it on the following dates. I've got all the dates of all these grazers, but as I can't see the dates because I'm on full screen, it's quite difficult to exactly which one's which. I was a bit worried initially that I was leaving too much green, trampling too much and wasting too much, but I really got used to that idea quite quickly, that it was good, because it rots down so fast. That kind of chicory and plantain leaf rots down very, very quickly, breaks down into the soil, and I'm really at peace with that now.
Ian, I know one of the barriers some of the people on the call here have is moving the sheep, and it looks like you've only got one or two strands. Could you just say a little bit about your infrastructure?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. I've got some photos at the end that show it. But
Okay, maybe
what
talk.
I can talk to it at this point as well, because those are three strands. It's a white and then an orange, then a white, because it's on a single reel. So it's a Gallagher. I use Gallagher geared reels. So it's a three to one gearing. I started out with a lot of wrapper fencing. I've got a wrapper trailer and use that winder. So for example, that field, I'll have broken the field down the middle using the wrapper, doing a sort of a 300, 400 meter run down the middle of the field, using the wrapper to put out a 3-strand electric fence. That I will then power, and then these dividing breaks I use on a geared reel with 3 strands on a single reel. And that was pretty much was game changing in terms of managing stock, because just using the trailer all the time to put up fencing on a daily basis for daily breaks was breaking my heart. It's just so repetitive and so clunky and heavy and hard work. But putting 3 strands onto a single reel means you can take up a fence and put down a fence in 5 minutes. So I set them up with, because it's a 500 meter reel, you can put 3 times 160 strands on it. So I tie them off to a fixed post at the end, and I never take that post off. I never untie it. So I've got all of my sets are set up with a wrapper end post, which has got 3 isolators. They're tied off there and they're tied onto the reel. So it's a permanent system. So it shouldn't get twisted. It gets twisted, but it shouldn't get knotted. And then you reel it out and you reel it in. Always connected, always tied. So just a quick question. Can you actually see me at the same time as this? Or can you only see the screen?
Hang on, I've got my chat up, so I can't. It depends what view people have got.
Only because I was just kind of describing stuff and wasn't sure if I.
No, we can see you. We can see you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I keep the 3 strands, and I'll put the end post in and then walk the strand out, and I walk the reel out using another fence post with the 3 strands flipped into it as a guide. So it walks out as 3, and when I plug it in at the far end, it's completely untangled, and then just connect it up to a fence at the other end, or a stand, and then I'll power that fence off the middle fence. That's the power line. And that has enabled me to sort of move to daily moves without spending forever moving fences. And as long as they're trained to it, now you saw in some of the earlier photos, there'll be plenty of lambs that aren't, and they'll go under. Any ewes that repeatedly go under, they get sold. I can't be doing with those. So you find after a while, you don't even have to have power on the fencing, especially with cattle. I mean, they're even better. But obviously with that system, you're also going to need water everywhere they go. So that provides another headache, but I'll show you. You might just be able to see if there's a water trough down at the bottom here, a water bowser at the bottom that I move around. There would have been one in that zone on mains because I just put in a new mains line. So they always have water wherever they go. Regrowth again, phenomenal, very even. Chicory is always very dominant, even if it's quite a low percentage of the mix. It grows so readily. It's got such a deep root, and it grows without rain. It's amazing. So in the environment we're going into with droughty summers, I want more and more of this stuff in because it's just so good. All the lovely mixes. Now, I think I know where this is going. Yeah, here we go. So in the second year, this is second year regrowth actually now. In the second year, I'd sold most of the sheep, so I had this tiny little flock of sheep going around, So I added the steers to them. I had some steers that I took away from the group and the heifers as I started calving. So I brought them in to join these cows. That was quite interesting because they ran at them like I don't know, 9 pins, really. Scattered them, quite challenging. And the sheep didn't really like being in with the cows, so I had to start giving them a double zone, giving them yesterday's zone to run away from the cows in. But it soon settled down. But they're going into good tall covers there. And once you got the cattle in there, they trample a lot more of this chicory stalk down. But it's never worried me, all this volume, because it's just more stuff to feed back in. It's not there now, let's put it that way. It's when I look at the soil now, it's not there. So that's chicory getting to probably 5 foot extension, just about to start flowering. At that point, it's still a very soft, edible stem. When it starts to flower, it does start to go more lignified. But if they don't graze it and it's left standing, what I discovered is any chicory that goes to seed, one, it's free reseed, and two, I had the most enormous charms of goldfinches last winter, just grazing through these fields, just I don't know, 150, 200 birds getting up all the time from these chicory stalks.
One of the things I often hear people say who have sheep is concerns about eating with the longer sward. Has that been a problem?
What, that they won't eat a longer sward?
Yeah.
No, I don't find that. What with sheep, I mean, it's a different beast, the herbal ley, because there's a lot of leaf all the way up. So it's kind of, you're looking at that plant there, there's similar leaves that you'd get when it's 6 inches, when it's 5 foot. It's still a multitude of leaves. I've got other photos I could show of just grazing pasture, longer grass with sheep. And as long as you're not trying to force them to eat everything, I think this is the mistake maybe people make, is you got to give them enough space for a day, enough food for a day, but don't expect everything in that field to be eaten. They will find what they want in the bottom. They'll nip off the tops of the grass, the sort of more succulent ends. They'll find the smaller bits in the bottom. They'll find the clovers, and they'll have what they want, and they'll trample the rest. If you at a 1,200 kilograms a hectare residual, that's not going to happen. Or you will. You can make it happen, but your sheep will go backwards very quickly. It took me a while with my breeding. I was moving towards that could do this. Ones that couldn't cope with it, that couldn't keep condition, I sold them. So I was moving the flock forward to a point where they could handle grazing long grass on a regular basis. It then made more sense, frankly, just to get an animal that would thrive on it rather than survive on it, which is another reason we moved to cattle. It wasn't just worms, it was the grazing I wanted to do, and the rotational system I wanted to run at the farm was far more suited to cattle itself. So it made sense just to switch out at that point.
Do you think you'll reintroduce sheep back in at some point?
We are doing slightly. We have a small flock, sort of 35, 40. That's about as many as I want. I don't find them as enjoyable to work with. They're not as suited to my temperament. I find the cattle a lot more. They're a more pleasant environment to work in now. No, certainly didn't get any problems with feet. So the feet thing, I'm convinced that's spurious. That kind of long grass, wet between their toes. I really don't think that's anything to do with the grass, because I never found that. What I think it's to do with is bacterial load. And I went through a first few years of that flock culling hard. Anything that was treated twice was culled, and within 2 years, then I did a foot vax treatment, and then after that I basically had very limited. I did 1 foot vax. I had very limited foot issues after that, including in lambs. So it'd be 1 or 2 cases each year of something that got mild cold or something like that. But certainly no correlation with long grass, because I switched to a completely long grass system, grazing everything to full standing hay, basically with sheep, and the feet never presented a problem. So I think that's more just a standard foot issue, and maybe if you haven't, if it's, you're not on top of the bacterial load or the viral load within the flock, maybe it triggers it more being longer. I don't know, but I think it's more important that you can get on top of your foot issues and then deal with that as a separate issue.
Thank you.
This is grazing, just grazing really tall stuff for sheep again. So I had some photos taken last year, which is quite handy. So you can get an idea. Can you see my mouse moving? Does that show up?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Okay. So what I was explaining with the fencing, so now we have, this is the steep hill, doesn't look very steep here. And these are the two Herbal Leys at the bottom. So we now have a hedge here and a hedge here put in under stewardship and fencing all the way along the side of this old gallops, which is much improved, makes my management a lot easier. Although this hill is still quite awkward to fence out. I invariably move them. If it's sheep, I'll split the field down the middle and then do sort of 10 paddocks. It depends on the numbers, depends on the size of the group. Now with the cattle, I'd probably give them that sort of size in one day, and I'd maybe get 8 to 10 days out of that 5 acre field. So they're getting roughly half an acre a day of good growth to play with. That's just for scale. The 1-year-old with a lot of 5-6 foot high chicory behind her coming into flower. So this is when there was one time last year. It was 1st of August. Around that point, I put the cattle back into this field when it was really full extension. It was great. That's what it was like in the bottom. So there's a lot of flowers in there. It's not all just chicory. There's good diversity in there. It still keeps coming, which is always pleasing to see that it hasn't disappeared. There's one field is much better than the other field, I must admit, or the other field, the steep hill, is a bit poor at the bottom. It's good at the top. It hasn't kept quite as even as the other field. The other field's very even throughout, much better field. That's the kind of diversity you can get in there. Lots of birdsfoot trefoil, red clover. You can see there chicory, all in flower, all at once. Just awash with insects.
The question there about your soil, what soil you're on?
It's a silty clay loam. As I said at the start, it's very high magnesium. It's very tight, and I'm starting to see improvements through in terms of soil tightness and structure in these fields, and in the grass fields in the permanent pasture fields through really long rest periods. I've got one particular section of a bale pod field that I set up for winter grazing last year that didn't get grazed. So I kept it as a drought pod for this summer. I didn't get grazed. So it still hasn't been grazed for now nearly 18 months. And that's actually having quite a benefit to the soil structure. The aggregation is moving down. Normally I get decent aggregation in that tight soil. I only really get it in the first 1.5 to 2 inches. I'm now starting to see that come down into the tight magnesium dominated clay stuff lower down in the profile, which is great because I don't really want to use gypsum, but I do want to do something about that magnesium issue. And if I can get decent aggregation through rest, then I'll do that. So it is starting to improve.
Sorry, as it's Soil Health Week, I feel I should ask you, do you use anything to record? Do you have a system for recording sort of soil?
I would say probably like quite a lot of people, I have Soil Mentor and I don't use it enough. I've done some Soil Mentor work. I did as a part of Herefordshire Meadows. We did some fields. I'm going to be doing some as part of the AOMB work, and I'm also doing it on bale grazing fields that are part of a research project for Pasture for Life as well. So I'm using it, doing visual tests and yeah, I'm taking photos and recording. I'm doing more myself. What I'm finding is I'm doing more myself. Just like I keep a spade in the back of the gate all the time. I just jump out and have a quick dig, see what's happening, and that's. I did that the other day with the really heavy rain, with the kind of flooding last week. Jumped into that field that started off with that chicory, plantain, red clover mix. I wanted to see what that was like, and the water was right down through the profile. So I was pleased to see that, and that's where I was seeing that the aggregation was actually looking quite nice. It was looking a lot more cake-like, down to maybe 4 or 5 inches, which is quite unusual for my soil. So I was pretty pleased to see that.
And David's got a question here. He says, are you not concerned that by continuing soil disturbance, that you could be taking succession back to zero and preventing the fungal bacterial improving?
Well, the soil disturbance on this was 2 years ago now. The soil disturbance on the second field that I did, that was 3 years ago now. So I'm not worried now. I think those fungal relationships were, well, if they were there, they weren't very good. And I think the bigger issue is the soils are so tight that there's no air and there's no water in there. So you can have fungal and soil microbiome lacking activity down there because nothing's breathing, it can't live. So I need to get air down into that soil. So if I can do that through improving rooting depth by using deeper rooting mixtures like this. I mean, these won't get changed now. They're a herbal ley that I'm hoping will just go through the 5-year countryside stewardship program and then just stay as a permanent pasture with a high mixture of, a reasonable mixture of herbs and legumes in there. I don't really want to be doing anything to them now going forward. So I'm hoping that it was a one hit, and it's any disturbance. Obviously, I don't like it, but I don't see how you can jump forward. No, I'll take that back. You can jump forward. It's just it's a very slow process, and I think the biggest issue, biggest bang for your buck I'm seeing now is by leaving stuff, totally leaving it. 12 months, 18 months. If I could leave a field for 2 years, I would probably get the best benefit. I mean, almost not graze it for 2 years and do nothing with it. If I could take a field out for a year, take 10% of the farm out for a year, I think the benefit actually going forward would be worth losing 10% of your grazing. If I can work the rest of the farm and stocking rate, I think the benefits would be so good. So that's, I don't intend disturbing any more soil. I'm kind of done on that front now.
David, I just wondered if you, because David has been mob grazing for about 10 years, I just wondered if you wanted to unmute and had any thoughts on what Ian said there.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. I just sort of assumed that you're going to keep on reseeding, really. To keep establishing these herbal layers. Do you think they'll keep on reinventing themselves to keep establishing?
I don't know if they'll keep on forever. I'm hoping that by letting them sort of really go to seed in at some point during this growing season, that I can keep getting a bit of free seed back into the system.
Yeah.
I'm hopeful. I'm not sure if it'll work or not, but I'm hopeful. I might just end up with a heavy field of cocksfoot at the end. Who knows?
Well, that's not bad.
Yeah, I don't know. No, my plan is not to keep reseeding. I know we'll come on to that kind of discussion fairly soon. Actually, we should move on because we there is discussion about funding sources for putting these in that we probably want to cover. So let me just dust through the last few things. Yeah, great. Everyone loves chicory flowers, I must admit. I think they're great for the birds. That's the kind of, they were really going into it, the cattle there. I won't play the video because we're getting on a bit of time. But I love this trampling, this kind of as management, that a lot of that stuff will still continue to set seed even though it's flattened. This is doing a bit of soil testing, soil sampling. That's red clover roots again, just no nodulation I can see. It's just a calf in very deep grass. It grows back well, even though you've got an enormous volume of trampling. I don't find any problem with it coming back. And all that surface matter is great for holding rainwater and protecting the soil, and it protects it from the heat as well. It makes a massive difference. Cool, the temperature under there, that soil temperature is always much lower. That's one of the so that's a bit that you have nothing to compare this against, but that is quite an improvement in that soil, because normally it is very tight and compact, and it's actually it's starting to look a lot better further down through the profile. Equipment wise, just a couple of little things. I use these Paxton troughs, and then I've changed to a fast flow valve on it. So then I don't have to have such a big trough, because it comes out at pretty much full bore pressure. Not good if they knock it over, because it keeps pumping out pretty fast. But it's definitely that's the trough that I don't like. Can't stand JFC troughs. I have some of those and I can't stand them. And people often wonder how you have all that that sort of temporary piping. I literally just drag them around. I have that little bit by my tow bar permanently attached, and then I can just screw my pipes in and drag them around the farm anywhere I want to go, and then hook them up into every field where there was a water trough in the corner. There's now a standpipe and the water trough, so I can plug into every field, and most fields at both ends of the field. So 200 meters gets me to pretty much any point in the field with a water trough. That was my old system with sheep. It was a 500-litre Bowser that I just poked through the electric fence, and the sheep could access it, but they couldn't rub against it and push it around and scratch on it, and that worked fine. Worked fine until it was really hot and sunny, and then lactating ewes can empty that in a day, which is a bit irritating. This is the triple reel line that I use for sheep. And that is it. There we go. We'll see those last ones just to open the floor before we don't want to lose time, to lose everything. There we go. Any more questions? Where can we go with this? Right, let's.
Thank you, Ian. That's fantastic. So much to take in. I imagine everybody's sort of just gestating at the moment. Yeah, I don't know. Christine, do you have any thoughts, having watched Ian's meadow presentation?
Hello. Yes, just only a couple of things, really. Thanks very much, Ian, for all the photographs there. It's given a really good picture. The things I noticed were, firstly, the always important aspect of context. So your context, the place you started was with stuff that had been overgrazed and poisoned for a very long time, and you wanted to get it back into production fairly fast. So your route felt like the right one at the time, and other people have got different contexts and different situations, so they might choose a different route with that. But I was really pleased to see the change to the GS4 mix that you put in there, because a lot of people I've spoken to over different times have complained that GS4 mixes don't last very long, they don't persist, and the shallow rooting nitrogen dependent grasses were part of that. So I think that gives you a better a basis for it. And it was also good to hear that you went through the process of getting your grassland surveyed and discussing it with people who had a view on whether grassland should be reseeded and reploughed before you did that work. And with the incentives, some of the incentives around Herbal Leys that have gone out there now, I'm aware of a lot of people not necessarily going through that kind of process, and sometimes creating quite violent disturbance to permanent grassland that they themselves are saying shouldn't have been ploughed up. So I can see you've had an ethical decision path through that, which is great. Those were the only things I wanted to add.
I think I was aware. I guess I'm a new entrant farmer, and so I don't necessarily have this approach. I'm not a stickler for the rules, but I don't have an approach of stuff, it's my land, I'll do what I want with it. I'm a bit wary that someone's going to come and heap a ton of bricks on top of me if I do something wrong, and you know, fine me, or I basically didn't want to fall foul of the rules, so I thought I'd better, if I was ripping up permanent pasture, find out if I was allowed, really.
But what you did in doing that was to establish what species you had or didn't have in the grassland. And one of the problems in the high weald is that there are quite good quality unimproved or good quality semi-improved grasslands, i.e. quite a lot of herbs in them, which are just not recorded.
Yeah.
And you know, people who don't know will look out there and say, well, that's just grass, isn't it? And they don't know. They, you know, sometimes they send in their surveyors at the wrong time of year, or they'll produce a species list and say this is poor quality, and underneath it is a species list that says it is good, decent quality, because that's the answer they want to. So I think it's really important to get grassland surveyed before you do anything with it, to understand both your starting point and your trajectory.
Yeah.
Because it would be possible to waste quite a lot of diesel and carbon and money and go nowhere with it in some situations. And in other situations, it's the perfect thing to do. But I've also seen this year some GS4 lays that were put down and which were absolutely atrocious because the establishment wasn't right.
I think if you're going to put in a GS4, they are. So I didn't touch on this actually. I always went for spring GS4 application. I know there are people who put them in the autumn. My concern was that actually, although you get a bigger weed burden in the spring, you need that warmer weather that you get through the spring and summer for your more delicate, or your legumes and your herbs to establish properly. The grasses will establish fine over winter in the autumn point. But what I didn't want was to spend a lot of money on GS4 and then find only the grass came, and I'd wasted a lot of money on all the other stuff. So I think my thoughts were it should go in spring and be put in properly, and then you might have a chance of actually keeping it in. You know, I have had to, at the bottom of that steep hill didn't establish well, and I have added a top-up mix over the top of it this year, and I put a bit of red clover onto it the year before. Neither of which have done square root enough, or as far as I can work out, but disappointing. But I've spent some money on it. I've got the receipts, so I've certainly had a go. I'm not really sure what else I can do apart from ripping it up and starting again.
There is a question here about how do the Herbal Leys put up with the hard winter weather? No
problem at all. In terms of, I'm not trying to graze them over winter either, so they certainly don't fall apart and rot away and disappear. I grazed that, so that main one I grazed end of October, 17th of October, 2nd of November. It got its third graze in one of the fields. Then there was the second field got one on the 17th of October, and then they went back in at the start of April. So they have a good rest over winter. It's quite useful going in with it, especially if you've got sheep. You can go in and do an early spring graze that will just sort of take out any of the sort of slightly older, more tired, or trample them in. Anything that died a little bit over winter, trample it in, and then freshen up for a nice spring of growth. Really.
I'm just going to skip a question. I'll come back to that, Joe. But David's asking, and it's relevant to what you're saying. How high is your stocking rate now with the cattle?
Well, as a whole farm, not high enough. As a individual cell, high enough, I think. So that I'm sure that you know the stocking density is a function of time, really. So as long as I've got the right size space and the right time, the stocking density is right. But it's more that there's enough feed for them for a day, and they're not hungry, but they're not having to eat out the bottom of any of the fields. I would rather they left lots behind and trample lots. So I can certainly, if we double stocking numbers, all I'd do is increase the size of the cell.
And Monica's actually asking, sorry, Joe, we'll come back to you, but Monica's asking, that follows on from that, saying that she said, thank you very much, very thought-provoking and informative. We've been told it's difficult to flatten stock on Herbal Leys, but this is not your experience? It
certainly wasn't my experience with sheep. Now, I think if you let it go to that real stem extension, chicory, 5 foot high stuff, maybe that will have more of an impact on fattening stock. But when I was fattening lambs for that kind of autumn trade, or for my lamb boxes that I was killing off in October, they fatten really well on that. So I've had no problem fattening lambs on it. I haven't tried fattening cattle on it because we're still in that early cycle. All the investment, still waiting to sell stuff, unfortunately.
And Stuart actually is chiming in and saying that it's not been your experience too, and that he's agreeing that the animals prefer the herbs, and that the cattle definitely prefer the chicory to grass. It's Ali who's on Stuart's login. Ali is saying that, his partner. So going back to Jo, she says, thank you so much.
I think New Turner came up with all that stuff in well over the 50s. So
yeah.
Taking us this long to get to it.
Yeah. And Jo is saying, did the funding pay for all the initial work? I see you diversified in that due to high cost and low value of meat. Not quite sure what you mean by that, Jo, but does that make sense?
We are a diversified business anyway. Well, we're a diversified business because we're 140 acres. It's just not big enough, to be to only be a farming enterprise. 100 acres of grass is not going to keep us in board and lodgings and pay all the bills in this kind of environment. The farm's too small, not without having some ridiculous multi-stacked enterprise with absolutely everything. And I am a one-man band, so I don't have time to do all the chickens and the pigs and absolutely everything else on top of it. So we diversified when we moved here from the farm that we were in Devon, which was a similar size. We bought a place that had the option to have diversified business on site to provide a different income stream. That's the point of that. Did the CS payment cover it? Yes, I think so. In the first year, I'm trying to think what it was something like it was a couple of £1,000 for the GS4 payment that year, I think, and yeah, it was £1,000 of seed. You saw that, and then my contractor to single plough, power harrow, roll it in, and rolling it in was like £8 an acre. So cheap. So it was not an expensive establishment, even including a plough.
And probably should be the last question, because I think we were meant to finish at 8:15, unless anybody has any more burning questions. But Ali is asking, have you had any issues with bloat on Herbal Leys? And if so, what have you done to mitigate it?
I've not seen bloat at all, fingers crossed, on anything.
I did, when we went on the Kent Wildlife Trust walk a couple of weeks ago, the ranger who manages the stock there was saying that the rumen in the sheep is developed within the first 2 years, and whatever you feed them on as lambs, they can then cope with. And it was bringing in the older stock. Are your lamb? Is it always young stock that come in, or are you bringing in older stock as well?
No, I mean, I can understand that kind of if you shock their system and change their diet, then they might struggle. But everything's bred on site, and I don't buy in stock. Everything's bred here, so there'll be a certain level of epigenetics, I guess, over time. I think bloat would be an issue if you're feeding them a field of red clover. But the bulk of this, although the red clover is there and it's present and it's a high portion of the mix, the bulk of it is chicory, grass, plantain, mainly chicory. Really, loads of chicory, and then sheep's parsley and burstfoot trefoil and all the other little bits. They're all in there, so it's not a red clover dominant kind of thing. I'm hopeful it's not an issue.
And actually, just could ask one last question, if that's right. I guess we're in a very drought environment further down the southeast. Have you got any thoughts on what your recommendations would be for people to create drought resilience, particularly as well as the flood resilience?
Yeah, chicory.
Yeah, I thought you might say that.
It grew all the way through 2020. It grew all the way through the summers. Every hot, dry summer we've had, it's grown. If you've got the soil that can take it, lucerne as well. Lucerne wasn't really going to take on our soil, according to Cotswolds, so I didn't bother putting it in the mix. Sainfoin as well, all good drought-tolerant plants. But I think a mixture like this, that's got a blend of deep-rooting herbs and deep-rooting grasses. Make sure you get deep-rooting grasses in. Cocksfoot, we've got to get away from ryegrass. Ryegrass has been developed over the years, and there are pages and pages of research on which is the best ryegrass. It's only the best ryegrass if you feed it, and if you don't feed it nitrogen, it's rubbish. And it's got shallow rooting, has no drought tolerance, goes to seed, has tiny little leaves. No interest from my side. I'm pretty strong on that one. I think we want to get to big clumpy, now especially now I've got cattle on, big clumpy grasses that'll hold up cattle over winter, that will have big chunky leaves. Cocksfoot's amazing in the winter. They can pull out almost a root and get a kind of a starchy load at the bottom. There's so much more feed value to that kind of plant. But anything that's got deep tap roots, that's our drought tolerance, and make sure you let it grow. Don't graze it like a tiny field of ryegrass that only gets to this height. Let it go all the way up, and then your drought tolerance comes from leaving lots of matter on the surface that takes the temperature of the soil temperature down to 15 degrees when it's 40 degrees up top. So last summer, all those fields with long grass that were flattened, you could put your hand down there. It's a cool microclimate that was slightly damp, even on a 40-degree day or a 35-degree day, or whatever we got up to. That's the essential stuff we've got to be doing, is leaving ground cover.
Great. Well, thank you so much. That was really, really helpful. And Joe's saying it's great to see how you were managing it, because they have a similar size farm. And yeah, just thank you. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah, feel free to get in touch. Anyone wants to drop me a line, or I'm on Twitter as well, all over that, making lots of noise. So.
We're going to stop the recording.